Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lesson 1.7, where we're going to talk about a globalization example. And so, by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to explain how globalization can impact a society through giving an example, and then explain, secondly, how globalization causes inequality. And so, we're going to do a case study involving India and Indian farmers. All right, so let's take a look first of all at standard of living in rural India. So first of all, just look at the definition of standard of living. A standard of living is the level of wealth, comfort, services, and material goods that are available to a certain geographic area. That is what a standard of living is for a country. It's the wealth, comfort, services, material goods that are available in that area. So let's take a look at what that means for India. Well, 65% of the country is rural, and of that, 58% of that rural labor force deals with just agriculture. So over half of the country is rural, and then over half of that population, 58% of it, work in some type of farming. So that's what that particular statistic means there. Next, over 85% of farmers own less than 2 hectares of land. That means they are small-scale farmers. So, while some of that may not be too impressive, you need to look at this. Those small-scale farmers, they produce 70% of all vegetables, 55% of all fruits, 52% of all milk, and 69 of cereal, and 69% of all milk for India. Yet they only use 44% of the land available to them. So they use less than half of the land in India, but they produce all of this. What this means is that small-scale farmers are vitally important to India's food supply and food security. Keep that in mind, small-scale farmers. This is the mom and pop organizations, the mom and pop farms. They are vitally important to India's food security. Keep that in mind. So some history about what's happened in India involving their standard of living. So India opened its economy up to global forces in the 1970s. So in the 1970s, India opened itself up to other companies and corporations coming in and beginning heavily investing in India. And so the government has removed restrictions and allowed foreign investment. Here's some examples. Fertilizer Cooperative, which is IFFCO, it actually launched a joint venture with Mitsubishi. And so their idea was to create agrochemicals in India. And so as a result, India is able to start manufacturing with the help of Mitsubishi Corporation, which is a Japanese company. These two countries got together, Japan and India, to help, work with fertilizer. And the IFFCO helped facilitate that. A Dutch private company called Rabo Equity Advisors, they actually raised $100 million for a fund called the Agribusiness Fund. And what their purpose of that is to invest millions of dollars into agribusiness for India. So they're trying to help increase Indians' agribusiness is what they're trying to do. Sorry. So as a result of all of this investment, India's economy is going to grow. GDP per person from 1980 is $260, but by 2003 it's $538. So while to you and I may look at this in the United States as not a significant increase, this for India and where they were in 1980 is a huge increase. So the problem is economic growth is not evenly divided or even distributed. And that's a global problem. It's not just an Indian problem. This is a global problem. 42% of agricultural labor is classified as poor. So if you're a farmer, more than likely you're probably going to be labeled as poor. There is a significant difference between rural and urban. Same here in the United States, but look at it in India. 25% of the rural population is below the poverty line. 13.7% of the urban population is below the poverty line. So living urban or living rural, you do have a good chance, statistically speaking, of being in some type of poverty. These numbers are pretty high. Rural wages do not grow as fast as urban. That's the same here in the United States. And oftentimes it results in weather and global prices. So it's not their control. It's because weather and climate change has prevented them from increasing their wages. Women work on farms, earn 70% of which a man works on a farm in India. And that number right there is 70. You can almost choose that universally. Through any industry, women are significantly paid less than a man in many industries. And then sadly, suicide rates are 47% higher among farmers than the national average. And it is because this is very much a stressful job. Now we're going to talk about globalization and how it causes inequality. You know, it's sad, but it does cause inequality. Now, if you remember in the previous lessons, we were talking about how economic globalization emphasizes less government regulation. Because you got to remember, if you're a company and I live in the United States and it's heavily regulating and so on and so forth, then I just leave my country and send it to another country. And like I said, I'll go to Vietnam. And so I can pollute as much as I want because Vietnam will allow me to do so. So economic globalization it emphasizes less government regulation because Vietnam is going to be less likely to increase it because they want my money and they want me to build a company or a factory there. Now, this led Indian rural wages failing to keep up with the rest of the economy. So actually, with government not regulating, wages either fell or they were failing to keep up. And so the Indian government tries to step in and regulate the wages, and most countries do that, where they try to regulate the wages. That's where you have like your, where you will have like, your minimum wage and things like that you need to do. And so this led to wage increases, but not across all sectors of the agricultural community. Small-scale farmers are forced to compete with large-scale farming corporations in an open market with less government protection. And this negatively impacts wages of small-scale farmers. Because keep in mind, large-scale farmers, these are the ones that have all the machines, that can actually work, the combines and all of that. These small-scale farmers don't have the money for that. And so having small-scale farmers compete with large-scale farmers simply isn't fair. And lastly, on this particular slide, this is showing that inequality that globalization has caused, and it's showing that unfairness that I was talking about briefly a moment ago. Let's look at small-scale farmers. They actually have less access to capital, less access to public funded services such as canals, and they have less education and a disadvantage in negotiating contracts because since they don't have access to, these are poor people by, by their nature, of their life, and so they already start out behind the eight ball, so to speak, and so they don't have access to the money or to the best farmland or even access to education to be able to make sure they're not being taken advantage of. But on the flip side of that, you also have large-scale farmers where they can buy more land that are closer to canals. They can use machines and hire fewer workers to increase their output. They have access to technology. They have lawyers that can fight their disputes. They have access to quality credit. And they can use information and communication technology to predict market changes. So they can say we're going to decrease production of potatoes and increase production in carrots if that's what they were trying to do. So just by being able to have access to that technology, it really gives them a heads up because they can research weather patterns and drainage, irrigation, all of that, because they have access to a bunch of technology that sadly small-scale farmers just don't have and never will have. So there you have it. Lesson 1.7 is complete with globalization examples. So can you describe the advantages of globalization? And can you describe the disadvantages? And if you can, then pat yourself on the back. You did an amazing job. Find any activity for 1.7, complete that, and then if it is uploaded for you, move on to lesson 1.8. Thank you so much and have a great day.